What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, April 25th, 2018, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday, and whatever insanity is in store for us there. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. If you've got something important to say, go ahead and call on in. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. But don't just call on in to hear yourself on the radio, because I really need to get through a lot of information today. And Mike will be answering your phone calls when you call on in to the show. So let's get right on in, because there's a lot of stuff going on. Starting with Syria, the Syrian army has liberated East Kwalamun, and they're just making this inexorable progress toward reclaiming their country. And now it's coming down to a situation where there are basically the Syrian-controlled parts of Syria and the U.S.-controlled part of Syria, and that is not a very pleasant situation when you keep hearing that the U.S. is already building more military bases in Syria without the permission of the Syrian government. But Syria's getting a lot done with relatively, inexpensive equipment, as opposed to that U.S. missile strike that Trump sent on in, which was 105 pieces of munitions, most of them Tomahawk missiles. They go for about $1.5 million a pop. Israel is still screaming unhappy about the fact that Russia is going to be sending, or has already sent, I'm getting mixed stories on this one, the S-300 air defense missiles. And Lieberman is out there saying that Israel will destroy the Syrian S-300 if it attacks our jets. Okay, if the S-300 shoots down your jets, what are you going to attack the S-300s with? Obviously, using a nuclear bomb would be politically very expensive. It would basically prove to the world Israel is a nuclear power, despite their policy of ambiguity. But I think probably what Mr. Lieberman ought to be thinking about is not sending Israel's jets into other people's countries, and that would solve all the problems. But Israel has this attitude that they're able to go wherever they want, bomb whoever they want, shoot whoever they want, and nobody has a right to resist. Now, Russia has come on back and said that if Israel hits the S-300s in Syria, the results will be catastrophic. They didn't get more specific than that. But it does sound like a lot of saber rattling with those S-300s. And this was a very scary article. This is over at uns.com, and it's titled Russia's Standoff Capability, the 800-pound gorilla in Syria. And what they're talking about here is that the U.S. seems to be trying to figure out a way they can directly confront Russia in Syria, but without having it get outside Syria, which I don't think can happen. But apparently Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters is saying that, yes, we should just go fight the Russians in Syria. And he says the key to defeating Russia in Syria is to win rapidly and decisively and keep it in Syria, and Russia will be afraid to do anything after that. So he's talking really, really tough. Trump is back to talking about a withdrawal plan from Syria, but it doesn't represent a stand down of military adventurism in Syria. What he's talking about is simply subcontracting the U.S. government's dirty work, like they did in Yemen, where they got Saudi Arabia to do the dirty work for them. And now Saudi Arabia, acting apparently on behalf of the United States, is putting pressure on the Qatar government to send troops to Syria to replace departing U.S. forces, or Qatar will lose U.S. support and the government will fall. I mean, they're just laying it on there with a trowel. And by the way, it would be illegal under international law for Qatar to invade Syria. But that appears to be the direction they're going. And then Trump keeps flipping back and forth on this, because according to this article over in antiwar.com, he's backtracked on the pullout of Syria and vows a strong and lasting footprint. Well, the two are not mutually exclusive if he's thinking in terms of a U.S.-led foreign force being in Syria. But it does seem like Trump, he's coming across as weak. That's what it looks like to me. He's being pulled back and forth by his different advisors who all want different things. Bolton wants war, and most of his advisors want war. The debate is how to do it and how far to take it. And he keeps flipping back and forth. And Trump is supposed to be the president. He's supposed to be a leader. He's supposed to lead. And he's supposed to be basically carrying out the agenda he promised us he was going to carry out when he was campaigning. But he does seem to waffle back and forth. And it seems like he's succumbing too much to his advisors. That's my opinion. And I think he needs to be stronger. I think he needs to know his own mind better. Even if I don't agree with what he's doing, he's got to be an effective leader. If he's flipping back and forth all the time, his subordinates aren't going to know what the heck is going on. That's a very dangerous situation. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, over in Chechnya, their leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, has called the recent U.S. missile raids on Syria an anti-Russian provocation, and has declared that regiments, battalions, and brigades of Chechen infantry can go to the Middle East to enforce order if Putin asks him to. So that is shaping up to be yet another player in an already too full card table. Russia is now showing the wreckage of Trump's stronger, faster, and smarter missiles intercepted in Syria, and the final numbers are in. Out of 105 munitions that were launched, only 22 U.S., French, and British missiles actually hit their targets. 46 missiles were intercepted by the Syrian Air Defense Forces. The rest just broke down and just fell out of the sky for technical reasons. Remember a year ago when Trump launched 60 cruise missiles at that Syrian air base? One failed coming out of the tube. Only half hit the airfield, and they didn't hit anything important. The rest just sort of flew off, and I presume probably blew up some goat herder somewhere. Now, Russia is claiming it has recovered a U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile in good condition, and they're taking it back to Russia to use it to improve their own weapons. The U.S. Department of Defense is out there saying, oh, this is absurd. This is utterly absurd. Of course they don't have one of our rockets, you know. Even though they were showing it on TV. Here's an article from Foreign Policy Journal that I think captures the current American perception of what's going on in our government. It says American officials continue to make laughingstocks of themselves, and they're talking about Mad Dog Mattis, the Secretary of War, who was out there trying to justify the missile strike, saying that Assad had gassed all those children up at Duma, even though he admits there's no evidence to back it up. He just believes that it happened. Now, that is a lousy way to be making decisions. That's like me believing that my neighbor is trying to seduce my wife and taking violent action on the basis of that belief without any evidence whatsoever. Now, over in Great Britain, their Minister of State for the Middle East and Foreign Commonwealth Office, Alistair Burt, is out there saying that the Syrian strikes were aimed to defend the Syrian people by destroying Assad's chemical weapons. Now, the problem with that claim is that by bombing chemical weapons facilities, you would kill thousands of people, Syrian people, from the resulting toxic cloud that would be released. That did not happen, which is an indicator there was nothing there. And now we're hearing that experts from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, they have reached the sites targeted by the attack. And they have said there is no trace of chemical weapons. It just wasn't there. We bombed another aspirin factory. So, 105 munitions, hundreds of millions of dollars, not just for the weapons, but for the fuel, for the launching platforms, the salaries for all the people. All that money spent, and they got really kind of nothing. It's a big nothing burger, militarily. Now, over at the corporate media, we're starting to see this very obvious escalation in a campaign to demonize and smear and attack anybody who's challenging the official Syria narrative. Oh, you're a Russian troll, you're a Russian asset, you're an arm of Russian propaganda. Remember when the Washington Post said that of whatreallyhappened.com? I felt rather proud, to be honest. And that's it. They don't have any evidence. They don't have any facts to back it up. It's just anybody who challenges the official story is going to get attacked. They're just smear pieces. The good news is they're doing it so much, people are noticing. It's called attention to itself. And people who are still watching the corporate media are saying, what's going on here? Where's the actual, debate of the facts in the case? It's just all personal attacks. And it's too blatantly obvious. And then the corporate media wonders why they're losing audience. Another little article, this one came out of Global Research up in Canada. They do really good work up there. And it says, where's the shame? Why is the world silent? Acceptance of the West's war crimes is the new normal. No, I have to disagree with Global Research on this one. Okay, the world isn't silent. The governments are silent. The corporate medias are silent. People are talking. People are very upset about what's going on. The independent media is very upset about what's going on. Right now, looking at the audience numbers for the corporate media versus the audience numbers for the independent media, you have to realize it is a mistake to frame your perception of what you think is going on in America based in terms of what the corporate media is saying. The fact that the corporate media is silent doesn't mean the American people are being silent. They're just being unreported. Now, adding more fuel to the fire over there in Syria is Turkey is continuing their military offensive in Afrin, and it looks like they're continuing to move forward. And the Syrian government is saying, really, we would like you to not invade our country. But Turkey is claiming that they're just out there to get rid of the last of the Kurds. But they've already declared that Afrin is now under jurisdiction of the Turkish government, and that's a bad sign. Remember, the agenda for Syria all along has been to balkanize it, to break it into pieces, to make it weaker so Israel can sleep soundly at night. And they want to break off a piece and call it Kurdistan. They want to give the Kurds all the oil and gas, so they'll sell it for the US dollar. And they want Assad to just have that part of Syria that really doesn't have much of anything in it. That's been the plan all along. And they still want Assad out. Over in Israel, the IDF continues to open fire on the Gaza protesters. And apparently the latest updated death toll since this march began is 33, including 4 children, 1 photojournalist, and the number of those wounded has risen to 2,436, including 410 children, 66 women, 22 journalists, and 9 paramedics. There have been no Israeli casualties. It's a completely one-sided battle. Okay, now the latest justification coming out of the government of Israel for why the snipers are killing child protesters is, well, they should be in school. If they were in school, then they wouldn't have been shot. That's why we shot them. They're playing hooky. I guess playing hooky carries a death sentence in I guess playing hooky is a death sentence in Israel. We're going to go to the phones now. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, what do you think Israel was behind trying to attack Yemen air base in Syria the other night?
Are you talking about the one where the armed drones came on in and the air defense system shot it down? Nobody's really sure. Israel is not taking credit for it. People think it may be some of the U.S.-backed militants trying to get in there. But attacking the Russians is a really, really bad idea because I disagree with that lieutenant colonel we were talking about just a few minutes ago. If we actually get into a conflict with Russia in Syria, we will not be able to win rapidly or decisively, and it will not stay in Syria. It will ignite at least a regional, if not global, conflict.
Yeah, Russia can move a lot of equipment real quick, Mike, and they ain't that far away, so we'd lose. It would take a lot more for us to move resources and weapons replenishment, and we'd lose. Hey, Mike, you know what's funny? Like, they didn't get the message, the S-300. You know, this S-400, S-300, the later models can pick up like something the size of a soccer ball.
They're very good missiles. They're very, very good missiles. I keep hearing conflicting reports about whether or not they've actually been delivered and are set up and operating. But whatever Syria had around that Russian base apparently worked because they shot all the drones down. And going back to that missile strike, I mean, look at the poor performance of the American weapons. More weapons were lost to mechanical failure than were shot down.
They just showed the Russian today. They had all the stuff spanned out, and I know they said 2 actually were almost intact, and
Yes.
they're already on the way to Russia. And Mike, you know, they showed almost full circuit boards where you can still see the processors on the boards. So these things were shot down. Yeah, sure, you can have some failures. There's no way 100 and something missiles are all going to reach their target, because we know the Tomahawk's not a perfect, weapon. But they did get shot down. But you see circuit boards fully intact, Mike. Like,
Yes.
I mean, layers of circuit boards. So, I mean, there's a lot of information there.
Yeah, but again, if you look at the numbers, 22 hit their targets, 40 were shot down, and the rest just crashed from mechanical failures. That's a 50% failure rate. That's not acceptable.
Russia at those prices of the Tomahawks are the so-called stealthy Tomahawks. I think the stealthy Tomahawks, Mike, were the extended range ones. That's it.
Could very well be. Could very well be. Boy, if the Russians got hold of one of those, that's going to be significant. Remember when that F-117 got shot down, and parts of it just disappeared, and now all of a sudden Russia and China have stealth technology.
And then also British had the Storm Shadow missile. They had parts for that. And also I think France has the Status. I think it's called the Status. The Status basically, I know one of the ships failed to launch them. So they had another ship France had. They had to launch them because the first ship couldn't launch them.
Yeah, the entire launching system on the ship failed. Where are they buying this stuff? It's junk. I mean, I'm opposed to the war, but, when you look at how much all of this stuff costs and then you see its poor performance, would you buy a car that broke down half the time?
Of course not. And Mike, not only that, but last night, AC-130 surveillance planes were supposedly they got scrambled by Russia EW, electronic warfare systems. According from what I was reading, they went black. So, Russia 25 years ahead on missile tech and electronic countermeasures, Mike.
Yeah.
Those are two big deals. We might have a lot of stuff in other areas, but missile tech is where it's at. I hate to break it to you. Missile tech and electronic countermeasures is where it's at. That's the future. And drone warfare.
Absolutely, and high speed, hypersonic missiles. See, the problem is that the United States military-industrial complex has basically been spending huge amounts of money to refine and improve the weapons used to fight World War II. Russia and China have been building the weapons with which they expect to fight World War III. And that's why so much of our stuff is not only not really effective, it's doctrinally inappropriate. We were talking the other day about how experts are now saying these giant $15 billion supercarriers the U.S. is building are really not cost effective when you look at what they actually do versus what they actually cost. Dustin, stay on the line. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey, and an idea occurred to me over the commercial break. Do you remember how Iran succeeded in capturing a U.S. drone by electronic countermeasures? They spoofed the GPS signal and convinced the drone that it was landing at its home base when in fact it came down in Iran. And given what is claimed to be the nearly intact nature of the Tomahawks, I'm kind of wondering if maybe Russia did that and guided these Tomahawks to a very gentle landing. Because I would normally expect a malfunctioning Tomahawk to just basically nose into the ground and rekit itself.
But that wasn't just any drone that landed in Iran, Mike. That was a CIA drone. That was a special drone. I think they only made 2, right?
Well, I don't know, but Iran has copied it and made a lot of them now.
And most likely Russia's got them too, because, hey, that's the nature of the game, right?
Yep.
The technology between allies. But hey, Mike, I know people calling in, like one of the calls said I should be a guest. We're all guests on your show. Thomas Jefferson said the most patriotic thing we can do for our country is be well-informed citizens. So I'm calling in to you and tell your listeners to do some research. It doesn't take long to figure out what's going on, and just go to like different sites. Like your site and Moon over Alabama and Blackstone Intelligence. All these sites, you can learn a lot. And yeah, sure, there's a lot of crap out on the internet, but more crap out on the TV screen.
A lot more.
But you can learn a lot by using your critical thinking skills. You got to think, and you got to do some research on what's going on, and that's knowledge is power. Like they fear you because if you're knowledgeable. Dumb people they don't fear because they're easy to control. So I just want to leave it. But Mike, I got 2 more things to say before I get off the phone because I want other call in with the Power of Siberia is going to be finished this year, Mike. That's the pipeline that's going from Russia to China for gas.
Mm-hmm.
It's longer than going from Russia to London, I believe, the pipeline.
Yes.
That's how long the pipeline is. That's a game changer, Mike. That's a game, especially with the petro yuan, because I think gas is will be traded in petro yuan too, right? Not just oil, all commodities.
Oh yeah, all petroleum commodities. I mean, the world is moving away from the dollar. And they're using their own domestic currencies, or they're using the yuan or the ruble, and that's why the U.S. is putting pedal to the metal on this war. They want to basically conquer the world and drag it back to the days of Bretton Woods.
And then my last comment is about China setting up manufacturing. Like it's in the process right now of hypersonic airplanes.
Yes. Now
the commercial airliner, Mike, goes from Beijing to New York in 15 hours. Hypersonic plane can go in 2 hours. Now, I just have a question, Mike. Will these planes be flying, like, at a higher altitude because of obstructions like birds and this or that? Because obviously going hypersonic speeds and birds are not going to equal good, right?
So they're going to be right at the upper edge of the atmosphere. Not only to stay out of the way of slower airplanes, but also because in the thinner air they can move faster.
Which goes to tell when Putin had his press conference, they have the hypersonic missiles. This is a reality.
Yes.
It's a reality. So, and Russia is further ahead than both of us and the Chinese. And China's already got the manufacturing line set up. So that tells you Russia is probably more advanced. So don't mess with the bear.
Well, it's hard to know who's really ahead when it comes to Russia and China. I remember seeing a video, I think it was about 4 years ago, that somebody claimed was a UFO that was shot over China. But to me, it looked like it was a test of a hypersonic transatmospheric craft. And so, yeah, China's definitely got some cutting-edge stuff out there.
It just blows me away, Mike. 15 hours to 2 hours. Is that amazing?
Yep.
What's next? What's after that? In another 50 years, maybe less. Yeah, that's amazing.
It's going to be amazing. London to Tokyo in 2 hours, and then wait for 5 hours for the luggage to come out the little ramp.
If they don't lose it.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Yeah, even with these hyper-dazzling aircraft, it's such a pain to travel these days. What with TSA and everything, it's made it very, very unpleasant. Now we're hearing all these stories about airline passengers who get tased. I'm old enough to remember, when flying was really special. The very first commercial airliner I ever rode on as a very small child was a Lockheed Constellation. And I just thought that was so cool, and I was hooked. And I love flying itself, but I don't like traveling these days because of TSA and all that harassment and the too small airline seats. I mean, I've lost 100 pounds, and still the airline seats feel way too tight. So it's not a pleasant experience at all. Okay, we're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come on back, more about Israel, more about the international scenes, some new developments on the domestic political front, lots to talk about. We'll get right to it as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And there is a video that has come on out. It's already gone viral all over the world. And the video is showing these Israeli occupation soldiers celebrating while they shoot at Palestinians in the occupied West Bank village of Madama near Nablus. This happened on the 13th of this month. And it catches them discussing the use of live ammunition against Palestinians who pose no threat before censoring themselves because the exchange is being filmed. According to the human rights group B'Tselem, which published the video, about 30 residents were trying to remove a roadblock the army had placed at the entrance to the village. Now, Great Britain has just authorized the sale of $445 million worth of arms to Israel, including sniper rifles and replacement parts. And the sale has gone on through, even though Britain is concerned that some of the sniper rifles might be used in the occupied territories to kill Palestinians. They're really, really concerned, but they'll take the money. Israeli forces have also invaded Nabi Salah, and this is over in the West Bank. Israel is ramping up the provocations. I think Netanyahu wants a third intifada, or he wants another excuse to go in and bomb the heck out of anything Palestinian to distract from his corruption problems. But his abuse of the Palestinians has crossed a line. Even Jews in Israel are demonstrating against him. When this first started happening down there on that border between Israel and Gaza, I said this could turn out to be Israel's equivalent of the Amritsar massacre, which was the turning point where Britain started to lose control of India. And I think that may be happening again. Apparently, there was another Israeli soldier, Ben Derry, who killed a Palestinian teenager, and basically the evidence was showing that this soldier intentionally killed Nuara, 17-year-old kid. There was no justification, but the judge basically reduced the charge down to accidental death, and the soldier is going to be spending 9 months in prison, and he'll probably be let out much sooner than that. And the judge basically praised the soldier and said, yeah, you are acting fine. Over in Yemen, at least 45 innocent Yemenis have been murdered by the Saudis in only 4 days. A lot of them had to do with that airstrike on a wedding, which killed a bunch of people, including the bride. And according to witnesses, there were no military objects in the vicinity of the targeted area at the time of the strike. They just bombed it to bomb it. Now, Yemen is very angry because another Saudi airstrike killed the chairman of Yemen's Supreme Political Council, Salah al-Samad. They apparently bombed his home on Thursday last week, and Yemen is saying they will respond to that because this guy was a politician. He was not a combatant. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Mike in Chicago. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I was reading an article about Finland is going to quit universal basic income,
Yes.
Which is just a real stupid idea. Some kind of a social program, a government, program that is a hit to the times, like kind of like a Social Security in a way, but they found out it's just not going to work. But who supported that was, of all people, Zuckerberg, is that his name? The CEO of Facebook, and
Yes.
CEO, yeah, right, and the CEO of Tesla also. But it's almost like, what do these people think? That the government is going to, create money or debase everybody's savings? We talk about that all the time. They're going to just dish out money, and then, the money you already have is going to buy you less at the store. Your basket is going to only have a couple items in there, for the amount of money that you're paying over, within a 10-year period. That's inflation. It's hidden. It's totally hidden. All right. So, but these big CEOs, that are stealing your information and selling it, are willing to just step up and say, oh yeah, let the government just, screw the little guy at the bottom who isn't going to be able to retire, and even if he does, his dollar is not going to have any more bang. It's going to be like a little cap, it's those little caps that you use to squeeze when they go off.
We know liberals tend to be socialists, and this universal basic income was a test trial to see if they could sell the idea of just making people permanently dependent on the government for their income. And the next step after that, and we're already seeing it with like Medicaid, is a work requirement. The government will tell you what job you're going to have, what job you're going to do. The government will then give you the money. That's communism, and that's the direction that this is definitely headed. We were going to talk about that a little bit later in the show, Mike, so thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and I want to get on back here to the international situation because it's getting tense. Now, Donald Trump, again, we're seeing flip-flops and waffling back and forth where earlier in the week, Trump was saying about, well, maybe we can just leave the Iran deal as it is. Now he's back to threatening Iran that it has to be changed or he's going to withdraw from it. And even Macron changed because Macron came to Washington, D.C. to try and convince Trump to stay in the deal. Because all the other signatories in this arrangement, all the other members of the pact, think this deal is just fine. And apparently they had a very long discussion, and somehow or other Macron is now over on Trump's side. In fact, somebody was commenting that Macron and Trump are the new Bush and Blair, and we know how bad that all worked out. So Trump is out there threatening Iran as the deadline, which is May 12th, next month, for renewal of the deal. And Iran's foreign minister is out there reminding everybody that while Iran is fully in compliance with the P5+1 deal, the United States has been violating the nuclear deal since the moment it was signed. They didn't remove all the sanctions. They removed some, and then they promptly added more sanctions back on there. And Trump is already talking about throwing more sanctions back onto Iran until they just, by gosh, do what I tell them to do. I wish Trump was as tough with his own advisors, his own cabinet. So Iran, meanwhile, has rejected Trump and Macron's latest nuclear deal proposals. Iran's position is they've signed the deal. There's no reason to change it. And they don't see that the U.S. or France, for that matter, have any legal authority under international law to come on in and retroactively alter the agreement. Reminds me of that Darth Vader scene in the second Star Wars movie. I've altered the bargain. Pray I don't alter it any further. That's the kind of attitude we're getting from the U.S. government. And then they wonder why other countries don't trust them anymore. So Iran's position is, we're willing to stay with the deal. We'd like the U.S. to comply with their end of the agreement. But if Trump pulls out, there will be no new deal. And they're going to go back to nuclear enrichment, and who knows what all else they're going to be working toward. Because Iran has to know If the U.S. is putting this much pressure on Iran to surrender its weapons of deterrence, then an invasion is definitely on the way. Iran's government just has to know that. Now, let's talk about Al Jazeera. As you know, Al Jazeera put together this very controversial documentary about the Israel lobby in Great Britain. It aired on British TV. It upset a lot of people. It upset, obviously, a lot of Israel supporters that the secret was out. And it upset a lot of the British people who didn't realize how much under foreign control their government is. Now, Al Jazeera has been working on a version for the U.S. about the Israel lobby in the United States. And, of course, Israel was out there screaming it's anti-Semitic, it's Jew hate, blah, 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 blah. And it was announced by the Zionist Organization of America that Qatar had agreed not to release this U.S.-Israel lobby film. But Al Jazeera has come on out and said, no, there is no cancellation. The project is going ahead. It will be released. And it won't be carried probably on any American cable network. We're going to have to watch it online. But when it comes on out, it's something that we all need to see. Because our government is not our own. Our government is bought and paid for by a foreign power. And even more sick, it was bought and paid for with our money. Congress votes to send your money to Israel. Israel funnels it back into the U.S., into AIPAC, and gives it to members of Congress who will agree to send more money to Israel. It's a giant kickback scheme if you really think about it. Over in Armenia, things are heating up. And the strategic situation is that Armenia is important to Russia because it's key to protecting Russia's southern flank. And back in 2016, then Secretary of State John Kerry sort of started kicking up the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh as punishment for Russia's intervention into Syria, because Russia's not allowed to go into Syria, even at the invitation of the Syrian government. We're allowed to go on in without permission because we're the exceptional United States of America. So it looks like Armenia is going through yet another covert U.S. regime change in order to basically pose a greater threat to Russia. And at some point, Russia is going to start responding. One of the reasons tensions are so high is that when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Russian Federation was created, the NATO nations made a promise. We will not expand any further to the east. And yet they have. They keep trying to drag more nations into NATO or more nations into the European Union. That's what led to the conflict in Ukraine. Yanukovych wanted to merge with the Russian republics. So they kick him out. They put in President Chocolate, trigger civil war all over the place. It's a huge mess. Now, getting on over to Korea, as you know, it's become very obvious that what North Korea meant by denuclearization and what Trump thought North Korea meant by denuclearization are not even in the same time zone. They're just miles apart on this. And we're coming up on the meeting between South Korea's Moon Jae-in and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. They'll meet at the Peace House. They're already talking reunification. They're having cultural exchanges. The signs are all good that the Korean Peninsula is coming back together. They're going to officially end the Korean War. And this is a problem for the United States. And there's a very interesting article that came out from Sputnik News, basically saying that Washington's fear is that the talks between North and South Korea will show that the problem has been the U.S. government all along, just going on in and messing around with other people's countries. And there's a concern that South Korea, or even a united Korea, would pivot toward China. So I don't know what the U.S. is going to do to mess that up, but I guarantee they will do something to mess that up. We reported earlier in the week that China was conducting live fire drills in the Taiwan Straits to send a warning to Taiwan, you'd better behave. Taiwan is now going to conduct their own live fire drills in a response. And I think we reported yesterday, polls in Taiwan are showing 70% of the Taiwan people are willing and ready to fight China for their independence. They don't want to be part of mainland China. They want their own country, which, by the way, under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they have a right to. Everybody has a right to self-determination. If the government 3,000 miles away is doing a lousy job, then have an independence referendum and break loose. And that's the way it's supposed to work. Unfortunately, such attempts at independence usually result in being bombed. This is a very troubling development. The House lawmakers have closed the Pentagon budget hearing to the public. We're talking about $700 billion. And normally, they will have an open hearing. But for the first time in at least the last 8 years, the House appropriators will meet with the Pentagon's top civilian and uniformed leader about the budget request behind closed doors. Now, whether this means they have been developing something really new and really secret they don't want anybody to know about, that's one reason to have it. Or it may just be that people are going to tune into this hearing and they're going to hear about all this money, billions upon billions of dollars going to the military, and they're going to get angry at where all those dollars are going in a nation where our pensions are unfunded and we have millions of homeless in the streets. Okay, another story out of Sputnik News. Apparently, they've been having more exercises, war games with the F-35, and it's still losing in dogfights to older jets like the F-15. Now, Lockheed is out there trying to say, well, you know, the F-15 pilots, they're just better pilots, and the F-35 is just perfectly okay. But it keeps losing. And I think one of the problems with losing our manufacturing over the last 30 years is the people in this country who knew how to make quality products have been lured away to other countries where their skills are appreciated and welcome and well compensated. Because I can't think of any reason why that missile strike Trump launched a couple of weeks back had a 50% failure rate from technical faults. Talk about a falling empire. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. The Senate has confirmed Mike Pompeo's appointment as Secretary of State, and it's just now hitting the airwaves that Dr. Ronnie Jackson said he's moving ahead with the nomination for Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Apparently, there was some criticism of some things in his background. Oh, my goodness. Now, we're getting some interesting information about McCabe. And the other day it came on out that McCabe had received a phone call from a very highly placed Department of Justice official who was not named, basically telling him to shut down the Clinton email investigation. Well, there's a new article out from Carter.com, basically saying that far from being outraged, McCabe did issue, or appear to issue, not a stand-down order, but tried to steer people off the email investigation. And apparently, multiple former FBI officials, along with a congressional official, are saying that there may have been internal squabbling over the FBI's investigation. There was no official decision to stand the investigation down, but there was just a lot of private conversation. They're trying to basically gloss over the fact that people in the FBI were saying, we can't investigate this, we can't investigate this. Well, why not? I mean, obviously, yes, anybody who was for Hillary being president wanted the investigations to go away. But I think there's a darker reason behind all of this. And I've mentioned it many times before on the show, and I'm going to go on mentioning it. And given the history of the Clintons back in 1996 and the Chinagate scandal, it is reasonable to ask if Hillary Clinton, while Secretary of State, was selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests and using her charitable foundation to collect and launder the money. She delivered the goods through that email server with weaker security than Ashley Madison. Remember when Guccifer was prowling around Hillary's email server, he said he found at least 10 foreign IPs rummaging around the file system there. Okay, Sessions is declining to recuse himself from the probe into the raid on Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. And a lot of people are kind of scratching their head because he did recuse himself from the Russian collusion investigation, but said he doesn't have a problem staying with the investigation to the Trump lawyer. Sounds like double standards here. A lot of people are saying, when is Sessions going to do his job? Now, Representative Zeldin, GOP lawmaker, has sent a letter to Sessions demanding answers about his involvement in the FBI raid of Trump's lawyer. Wants to know what the heck is going on over there. Congress needs to assert its oversight responsibilities here. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a lot of stuff going on in the darker corners of the nation's capital. Greg Craig was the White House counsel under President Barack Obama. And after Obama left office, Greg went to work for a law firm called Skadden Arps. And now he's abruptly left. His bio's been taken off the website. Skadden Arps is saying, or rather refusing to say whether his departure had anything to do with special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Because apparently the law firm, Skadden Arps, has come under scrutiny because of its work with Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign manager, chairman on behalf of the Ukrainian government in 2012. Now, a team led by Greg Craig helped produce a report that sought to justify the imprisonment of Yulia Tymoshenko, a political rival of Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president at the time, and an ally of Vladimir Putin's. So, if they're not careful, they could open up a real big can of worms there that's completely unrelated. But again, Mueller has just wasted millions of dollars and well over a year chasing this complete bogus Russia-Trump collusion story. There's been absolutely no evidence. We're now finding out that the document that was used to launch this so-called investigation was made up purely of speculations and opinions and suppositions. There was no basis for it whatsoever. The good news is polls are showing that Americans are turning against Robert Mueller. Something like 60% of Americans right now think Mueller's investigation is just a political hatchet job, and they think it should be ended. Now, apparently, on Fox News Night with Shannon Bream, they were talking about the possibility that former FBI Director James Comey has committed criminal espionage. And this has to do with those memos that he leaked to be published in the media. And there was classified information in those memos. That's a violation of Title 18, Section 793, paragraph F. Now, you really need to read Title 18 sometime to see what's in there, because remember, James Comey gave Hillary Clinton her get-out-of-jail-free card by saying she didn't mean to do wrong. But intent is not required under Title 18. Criminal espionage is defined as taking classified information out of its secure setting and taking it somewhere else. That's it. And that's what Comey did with the memos. And this is punishable with a 10-year federal prison sentence. Now, of course, Washington, D.C. doesn't eat its own, and I don't think anything's going to happen to Comey because our government is just that corrupt. But apparently Comey was worried because apparently at the same time he was leaking those memos, he lawyered up. And he basically hired, he leaked the memos to his friend Patrick Fitzgerald, and he basically got a lawyer about the same time. So the inference is he knew he was breaking the law. And here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. Okay, now Comey leaked the memos to a Columbia law professor, Daniel Richman. And it turns out Richman had what's called special government employee status at the FBI. Wasn't being paid, but he was basically identified and credentialed by the FBI as a special government employee. Maybe that's the fancy term for an undercover informant. So this is getting murkier and murkier. Now, here's an interesting little story. In Comey's book, which I have no intention of buying, Comey says that the FBI didn't believe Hillary could be prosecuted when it launched the email probe. And that's why they didn't work on it all that hard. And what's interesting is in the book, Comey claims the FBI was not going to prejudge the result, and yet in the very next sentence he admits that's exactly what they did. This will never get prosecuted, why would we bother? Now, a closer reading of Comey's memos in his book indicates the briefing on the Russian dossier was just a deep state setup. And there was no evidence. It was a smear job. Hillary couldn't stand the fact that the American people didn't elect her. And talk about, being bitter and carrying a grudge. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. The Daily Caller News Foundation and Judicial Watch are filing a lawsuit in federal court seeking records to determine how many times former FBI Director James Comey met with then-President Barack Obama. And the reason for that is the former FBI Director claimed he rarely met with Obama and that he was an independent and nonpartisan leader of the nation's top law enforcement agency, even though in his book he's clearly indicating that he was not independent. And he wasn't nonpartisan. Now, Comey's impartiality about his relationship with Obama was called into question by the Senate Committee on the Judiciary when its chairman, Senator Chuck Grassley, uncovered a private, undisclosed meeting Comey held with Obama on January 5th, 2017, 2 weeks before Trump's inauguration. Now, Obama is 2 weeks away from being out of a job. He should be packing. So what was being discussed? And that's what the Judicial Watch and Daily Caller News Foundation want to find. Was that when the plan was hatched to try and destroy Trump with this Russia-Trump collusion story? Now, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein apparently is looking at job offers from at least one corporate media network television news team and 2 law firms. And the question is he going to resign, or is he just making sure he's got a landing pad in case he's fired? But it looks like he's considering an exit from the Department of Justice. Lawyers for Roger Stone have sent a formal demand to the Democrats to preserve all evidence related to the countersuits that are being filed in the wake of the DNC's ridiculous multi-million-dollar lawsuit against everybody that they hate, claiming that Russia hacked the DNC servers. Now, unfortunately, this long after the fact, we cannot rule out the possibility the servers have been tinkered with to plant evidence. But along with the servers, they want the paperwork and other records as well. So the DNC may have hoisted with their own petard on this particular lawsuit, because WikiLeaks is suing them, Trump is suing them, Roger Stone is suing them. And the optics are really, really bad at this point. In fact, there's another article that came out of Zero Hedge where Democrats in the Midwestern battleground states are telling the Democratic National Committee to just back off this Trump-Russia rhetoric because it's turning off voters. Now, the DNC is doing a good job of winning New York and California, probably because of all those illegal immigrants being brought in to vote. But these Midwestern Democrats are saying the problem is Trump keeps talking about jobs and the economy, and the Democrats just keep talking Russia collusion, Russia collusion, Russia collusion. They don't really have a policy or a platform to run on in the midterm elections. And actually, the poll numbers are starting to narrow. The Democrats had a lead a few months ago, a significant lead. It's narrowing. Now, apparently the Senate is getting contentious over the nomination of Gina Haspel as CIA director, mostly because of her being involved with the use of torture. And she was basically, she's tied to the CIA's use of harsh interrogation techniques after the September 11 attacks. And a lot of people are saying that's not really somebody that we want in charge of the CIA. Unfortunately, Trump seems to think torture works, although any interrogation expert will tell you, no, it doesn't. The person being tortured is going to say whatever stops the pain. All torture really is good for is obtaining confessions. And it was used for that as well. They tortured Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. They waterboarded him something like 130 times, and then locked his kids in these dark metal boxes with biting insects and made him listen to their screams. And only after that did he confess to being the mastermind of 9/11. So there are some people who are saying this person should not be confirmed, and I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree here. Little reminder that back when this whole Hillary Clinton email case first came to light, the FBI agents assigned to this investigation had to sign a special form not to talk about the probe to anybody unless they were called to testify under oath. It was called a case briefing acknowledgement form. And people in the FBI said they'd never heard of it being used before. I mean, everybody who works at the FBI signs a general non-disclosure form as part of their security clearance. But nobody has ever seen a single case where there was an additional non-disclosure. So again, what is being protected? What were they so scared was going to come on out that they went to these exceptional steps? And again, it gets back to that question. Was Hillary Clinton running an espionage operation using that email server and the Clinton Foundation? We're going to take a phone call from Tom in Connecticut. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. You made mention of those DNC lawsuits that are being thrown around like party favors. Wasn't they on the verge of collapse and the Clintons gave them money prior to the election?
I'm sorry, who was on the verge of collapse?
The DNC, the Democratic National.
Yeah, they're broke. I mean, Obama basically spent all their money for his 2 elections and failed to basically pay it back by going out and fundraising on behalf of the DNC. So they were in serious financial straits. And yes, Hillary Clinton basically poured a lot of money in there, and with it came the directions that the DNC would do what Hillary told them to do, which apparently included rigging the primaries to get rid of Bernie Sanders.
Well, I mean, lawsuits are not cheap, and given, the knowledge that, they didn't have a significant resource and the Clintons had to bail them out, wouldn't it be prudent to kind of like find out where the hell all the money is coming from doing this stuff?
Well, the campaigns are supposed to be keeping records for the Federal Election Commission, but as we reported yesterday, the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC were running this something like $80 million money laundering operation to conceal where the money was coming from, to evade campaign finance limitations.
Well, yet another kettle of smelly fish, for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and get on back to the news. Now, one of the perks of the president's job is he gets to nominate judges for the federal courts. And it looks like Trump may be turning his sights on the Ninth Circuit Court, which is ultra-liberal and has handed down some amazingly bogus decisions. They routinely violate Title VIII when it comes to issues of immigration. So apparently, President Trump and Senate GOP leaders are going to be able to fill 7 open seats with conservative picks. Now, obviously, the Democrats are out there just, they want to protect the long-standing leftward lean of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals because that's where they always take these cases, knowing the court will rule in their favor. But I think the court ought to be more balanced. You know, I don't think it should be all liberal or all conservative. I think it should be balanced. And so this strikes me as a really good idea. Okay, story coming out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. You ever notice that we have to go to the foreign press to find this stuff out? There's a new book out called Chasing Hillary, 10 Years, 2 Presidential Campaigns, and 1 Intact Glass Ceiling. It's written by New York Times journalist Amy Chozick, and it basically has 2 interesting bits of information. One is that Bill Clinton did encourage Donald Trump to run for president about a year before he entered the race, and apparently he did it thinking it was going to throw the Republican Party into turmoil, making it easier for Hillary to win her election. And Bill Clinton, according to this book, did speak to Loretta Lynch to help clear Hillary on the email scandal, the tarmac meeting. So all this stuff is coming on out. Judicial Watch has acquired 10 new classified emails that Hillary either hid or tried to delete, and it confirms she had classified conversations about Israel on her non-secure private email server. That's a Title VIII violation. Where the heck is Jeff Sessions? Remember, the NSA told James Comey they had copies of all of Hillary's emails, including the 33,000 she deleted. Comey said, no thanks, not interested. Whatever's behind that email scandal has got to be something really terrible, something that would delegitimize the government, something that would bring the government crashing down. Okay, so let's talk about the economic news here for a little bit. Apparently 12 retailers are at risk of bankruptcy this year. Subway is closing 500 stores. It looks like they're getting out of the American market, which is a shame because I like their stuff. I like their food. Article coming out of John Rappaport. The government can't find $20 trillion while pension funds are tanking. This recently came on out that there's $20 trillion missing from government records. They don't know where it went. They know they had it. It was just here a minute ago. We don't know where it went. And this missing $20 trillion, it does not refer to the national debt. And there's an irony there. If they hadn't lost this $20 trillion, they could pay off the national debt and set us all free from the debt slavery of the Federal Reserve, more or less. $20 trillion. You know, a trillion here, a trillion there. Soon you're talking some real money. Now, as we talked about with this caller earlier in the show, Finland's government launched this 2-year experiment offering a selected group of non-working citizens a universal basic income or money for nothing. And Finland was the first country in Europe to do this, but they're ending it. When the 2-year period is up, it will all stop. That's the first of next year. And the whole idea of free money, it really, how do you fund this? Where do you get the money to give a universal basic income to people? Unless, like I told that caller, the goal is to get everybody in the country dependent on the government for their income, and then the government comes in and says, well, we'll assign you for some kind of a job. And that's communism. And that seems to be what the liberals want. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And once again, we're going to remind you, RBN needs your help to stay on the air. In fact, somebody just posted a member story at whatreallyhappened.com about how corporate social media behemoths are systematically censoring independent media. Stunning new report confirms the carnage. And yes, we've been seeing that all along. There's a war on for your mind. And we need your help. And if you can help, please do. And no amount is too small. The address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call to pledge being a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Okay, now then, back to the economic news here. Okay, I'm going to have to step back. Apparently, Donbass is now being shelled under NATO command. Oh boy, that's going to be ugly. That's another flashpoint. They're really not going to be happy until there are mushroom clouds all over the place here. Back to the economic news here. Over in Ireland, they've had some kind of a goof where the money just vanished from bank accounts. And apparently it was a major mess up by Ulster Bank that saw payments and bank account balances just suddenly vanish. Salaries were not being paid, cards were being declined, customers were unable to pay for goods and services. And it's another reminder that you should keep your cash at home. Cash is king, at least that's what they used to say. Now, over in Sweden, as you know, they're pushing this experiment in a cashless society. This is the second time they've tried it. They tried it in India and almost wrecked the place. Now the people of Sweden are having a rethink. And they're saying that they can manage without cash, but it puts them at risk of attack because you're now dependent on those little computer terminals. And it's all being run by the government. And they're concerned governments do make mistakes. Remember Obamacare. So the Swedes are now saying they want to go back to, at least for small purchases, banknotes and coins. A lot of retailers in Sweden won't even accept notes and coins anymore. You either have a card or you're not welcome as a customer, which in my case I would say, okay, I'm not your customer. That's the problem with all this cashless society. It doesn't help you, it helps the bankers. It gives them control over all your money, along with giving the government yet another way to track what it is you're doing with your life. And it's none of their business if I stop on the way home and get a jelly donut. I don't want them to know that. I'm a very private person. I keep thinking back to that time when Claire and I were at Safeway, and the whole card system had gone down. EBT wouldn't work, credit cards wouldn't work, debit cards wouldn't work. Everybody was in line with baskets full of food they couldn't pay for. Claire and I, we had cash. We took our food, we went home. Simple, easy. This push for a cashless society is not for your benefit. It is to make you even more firmly a slave of the bankers. Now, over in the German media, they've had an editorial basically saying that the U.S. has kneecapped itself with its sanctions on Russian aluminum because the U.S. needs a lot of aluminum, and now they're going to have a problem getting it from other suppliers. And there's going to be shortages, and that means the cost of anything made with the aluminum is going to go up, like your beer can, or certain automobiles, certainly a lot of aircraft. They did the same thing with titanium. And they're just pushing on this Russia situation all the time. And this is way beyond the Cold War. I remember the Cold War. And it was, we're taking a lot of money, we're making a lot of weapons, we're sneering at each other, but it never crossed that line into actual risk of a direct confrontation. And we seem to be way past that right now. And that's why I think we all ought to be very, very concerned about what's going on here, especially this article about Donbass being shelled under NATO command. That's very alarming. Now, as you know, there are certain raw materials that are needed and are sometimes good to invest in. Apparently, there is now a lithium shortage, and it's not considered a precious metal, although it's being called white petroleum now, but it's a crucial element in today's high-tech economy. It's used in batteries, it's used in all kinds of modern equipment. Demand for lithium is soaring, and producers are searching for sources of supply. And right now, it's the prices have doubled in the last 2 years. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. I'm going to take a look at this story about Donbass and see what the heck is really going on here. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Ron in the Bronx. Aloha, Ron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Aloha. I just seen you on the live stream on YouTube, man. You look good, man.
Thank you.
I want you to, don't say we don't need guys, patriots like you ill, Anyway, so my question is about the U.S. military. I see a lot of memes, and I got into it with a lot of people online about, if the U.S. military can't succeed in Afghanistan or Iraq, how could they succeed against a formidable military such as North Korea, the Russians, the Chinese? And one guy told me the reason why the U.S. military doesn't succeed in Iraq and Afghanistan is because to keep them under occupation for years to come just so they could steal the natural resources. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the original model, at least back when General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on this operation, was to go into a country, regime change it, put it under the control of a government that was subservient to the U.S., and then move on to the next. Unfortunately, these wars have turned into these quagmires. They still don't have complete control over Afghanistan, especially in the east. Iraq's new government is already saying, we need you guys to go. And this garrisoning of all these countries is a huge drain on our military resources. So I don't think it was intended that we were going to garrison these countries. It's just unfortunately become an inevitable result of how these things are going. In terms of both Syria and Afghanistan, I think the reason they're staying in there is just so that the U.S. is not seen as losing these wars. And that may be why Trump did the about face after he was talking about leaving Syria and then goes on in with this massive attack. He doesn't want to be the president who loses the war. And apparently that's a very common situation because, again, I want to go back to that movie, The Post, and there's a line in there where they're realizing that McNamara knew they were not going to be able to win in Vietnam, and yet the war dragged on for another 6 years because nobody wanted to be the president who lost that war.
Wow, okay. One other question. Will Russia ever respond to that first round of Patriot cruise missiles? Or that's it? They're just going to, leave it as be and take, the moral high ground and not respond, militarily? Well,
Russia had made it very clear that they would respond militarily if they and their positions were attacked. But France, U.S., and Great Britain made a point of staying as far away from the Russian positions as they could. And so Russia is playing it cool. Putin doesn't want to escalate the situation. And it's now looking like those 22 missiles that actually hit their targets just blew up a lot of worthless junk. They got the aspirin factory and 2 other buildings that obviously didn't have chemical weapons. So it was a huge expenditure of money, and basically the U.S. government's got egg all over its face.
Right. Mike, thanks again. Keep up the good work, and I'll make a donation real soon. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much here. And now, let's see. Getting on back to this story that's just now breaking, and I'm trying to basically dig through all these multiple articles to get a cohesive story. Apparently, there was an op-ed by Russell Bentley, was published in Fort Russ, just basically saying there's a new offensive about to begin on the Donbass in early May. Now that spring is here, the wars are going to be blooming. And apparently, there was a town, Yasenovaya, was subjected to a mortar shelling by the Ukrainian army, but it was under the command of NATO. And that really escalates the situation to have NATO in there doing this. Now, apparently in response, let me see, well, they're claiming Russian forces have shelled Ukrainian positions, but I'm not sure if this is reliable information. Call it the fog of war. But having NATO in there carrying out these attacks, we're getting closer and closer to a direct conflict with Russia. And these maniacs are not going to be happy until they get it. And they've got their bunkers. They're all going to go on down there, and they've got their luxury bunkers like at the Greenbrier, and they'll just stay underground for a year or so. And they'll come on up, and the world will be beautiful and like the Garden of Eden. No, it won't. It's going to be a dead husk, because the radiation will kill off the entire food chain will collapse. There will be nothing to eat. They'll have to eat each other. Getting on back to the economic news here, over in Colorado, school teachers are getting ready to basically demand billions of dollars in education funding, and they're talking about a strike, unless they get more money for the schools. And apparently, lawmakers in Colorado are proposing a law to throw striking teachers in jail. Now, that one is going to have to go all the way to the Supreme Court as well. A strike is, I think, protected by the First Amendment. But we're slipping more and more into tyranny and dictatorship. You will work for lower wages and salaries. You will make do with lowered budgets. We've got to send all the money to the war zones. And I'm sure those striking teachers are looking at that almost $700 billion budget just this year for the Defense Department and wondering why they can't have that money, or at least part of it. And it's a huge amount of money. And look what we're getting for it is junk. It's a gigantic scam. We are an empire in decline. Now, story coming on out from the Washington Times. A federal judge has now ordered a complete restart of DACA. And the judge has imposed a 90-day delay on his ruling to give the government a chance to re-argue its case. But basically, the judge said that President Trump's attempt to roll back the Obama-era DACA program was illegal, and the entire program would have to be restarted. Now, this goes beyond other judges who said the phase-out is illegal, but ordered Homeland Security to accept renewal applications from people who'd already been awarded DACA status before. This new judge is saying everybody, even people who have never been approved, will be allowed to apply for DACA. There's a small problem with this. With all of these judges, they're way off base. DACA is not a law passed by Congress. It was an executive order by Obama, and it can be repealed with another executive order by Trump. The judges have no authority in this. It's total bovine excrement. The president, under Title VIII, is allowed to set immigration controls. And I think these judges need to be kicked off the bench. They're presuming authorities they do not have. DACA is not a law. It's an executive order, and it can be overturned with another executive order. That's it. End of story. Now, apparently, one of the caravans that were approaching our southern border has now arrived. It's carrying a lot of people from Central America trying to get over. No report yet of confrontation or conflict. But Trump is now saying that he may make a border agreement with Mexico part of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Basically, Trump is saying Mexico needs to be more of a help in preventing illegal border crossings. Well, Trump doesn't understand. Mexico's glad to be getting rid of these people. These aren't the best people in the Mexican society. They're people who can't make it in their home country. Many of them are criminals fleeing prosecution. MS-13 is coming across the open borders, and they're becoming a major problem in this country. People carrying diseases. Mexico doesn't want them. Mexico is just laughing its head off over the U.S. open border policy. Years ago, when Fidel Castro was still in charge of Cuba, there was a big stink about, allowing those poor Cuban refugees to come to America. Seems that we go through the same mistake every time. And so they said, yes, Cuban refugees coming to America will be allowed to stay. Castro went down to all of his prisons, took all the prisoners, put them on boats, and said 90 miles that way. And they settled in Florida, and Florida's crime rate went right through the roof. Now, over in Bavaria, which at least when I was there was a very beautiful country, sub-country, it's part of Germany. But Bavaria's government is ordering Christian crosses to be placed at the entrance of all state administrative buildings. And they're saying this isn't about religion, but about reasserting the cultural identity and Christian Western influence of the region. They're trying to push back at all of this Muslim screaming for Sharia law. And they want to reassert being Bavaria. And I remember when I was there, Bavarians are very proud of Bavaria. So, apparently there was a shooting in the Dallas Home Depot. 2 police officers are in critical condition. The female cop was shot in the face. And yes, the perpetrator was an illegal immigrant and previously convicted felon. Why is he allowed to be in the state? Why is he allowed to be in the country? We keep seeing this over and over and over again. The illegals come up here, they commit crimes, and it's reasonable to ask, why are we letting these people in? Now, over in South Carolina, proving once again we're under foreign puppet rule, they just passed they're about to pass legislation to adopt an Israel-centric definition for anti-Semitism, which includes criticism of the government of Israel. In other words, they're going to criminalize criticism of Israel. Now, this needs to be challenged on First Amendment grounds. Freedom of speech. Israel hates the First Amendment. They want what they call the Palestinian exception. Anti-Semitism is not criticism of Israel. That's like saying that criticism of the Nazis is anti-Germanism. It has nothing to do with their ethnicity or their religion or any of that stuff. It has to do with their behavior. That's the issue. How the government of Israel is behaving is the problem. if Israel has its way, we're going to lose our First Amendment, because once they carve out an exception for Israel, they'll start carving out exceptions for other things. Oh, we'll criminalize criticism of the vaccine industry. We'll criminalize criticism of the GMO industry. We've got to protect those corporate profits. Yes, the Bill of Rights gives us freedom of speech, but we didn't think you'd have the bad taste to actually use it. Over in Broward County, Florida, boy, they just can't seem to get a break. More negative publicity. And apparently, there's been an ugly incident in a juvenile detention facility. And the story is that the guards there were running a fight club, a child fight club. They were encouraging these incarcerated kids to fight with one another. And there was an incident where this officer literally grabbed a kid who didn't move as fast as the officer thought he should, and he slammed him into a wall, put him on the ground, and punched the kid in the face so hard it broke his nose in 2 places. And of course, prosecutors have said, oh, well, the officer was perfectly justified in doing this. Now, the officer, his name is Bryant, claimed that the kid became combative and punched him first, but the security video does not show that. Another sign of impending dictatorship and tyranny. All right, let's talk about guns and gun rights now. There was a March for Our Rights rally in Olympia, Washington. It drew about 2,500 gun rights supporters who don't want liberals ending the Second Amendment. And they gathered on the steps of the state's Capitol building, and the corporate media refused to cover it. Corporate media is out there with David Hogg and all the March for Our Lives and just pushing that anti-gun agenda. But the rallies in favor of the Second Amendment are being totally ignored. So, does gun control really work? Well, no, it doesn't. People are going to do violent things. We're seeing over in Great Britain, where there are gun bans, there are now machete attacks. Everywhere you have gun control, crime goes up, violent crime goes up. Just look at England, or Chicago, or Baltimore. Very strict gun control there. 29 killings in the past 3 weeks. Venezuela banned guns. Now their murder rate is skyrocketing. Take the lesson from Kennewick, Georgia. They passed a city ordinance, every home must have a gun, and crime fell by 83%. This was 10 years ago they did this. There's only been 1 murder in that entire time. Now you contrast that with Baltimore or Chicago. And don't forget, we have this ugly stink here where the CDC did a research project, and they found out that guns are used in self-defense almost 4 times more often than used by criminals, and they suppressed it. They refused to publish it. It had to be leaked out. The gun banners, the gun grabbers, they're not thinking about you and your safety. They want the guns so that you will do as you are told to do. Every dictatorship in history has disarmed their population so the population cannot resist what the dictators want. That's an historical reality. Every genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban on the targeted population. More about this when we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about guns, gun ownership, gun rights. And over in Illinois, the Effingham County Board approved a resolution to become a sanctuary for gun owners. They're basically taking all that nonsense about sanctuary cities and they're flipping it back on the liberals to say this is a sanctuary for gun owners. And it's symbolic, but they're trying to make a stand and say that, yes, there is a Second Amendment. And even without the Second Amendment, and all the Second Amendment does is says the government understands that we have a natural right to keep and bear arms, at least for self-defense, especially with the soaring crime rates. But they came on out and they took a stand, and good for them. Now, out in Arizona, there was an ugly incident where apparently there was a state trooper who'd stopped to investigate a car crash on the interstate, and was ambushed and shot. And apparently a driver just passing by saw the attack on the state trooper, pulled over, got his gun, shot the shooter. And so he's being praised as a hero. And again, there's an object lesson for the police. You know, the gun that you leave in the hands of a law-abiding citizen may someday save your life. We're going to take a phone call here from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was just listening to your story about the Fight Club thing and how repulsive that is, really.
Yes.
But you know, it would be funny. Remember a couple of years back when Sheldon Adelson had all these Republican people calling on him in Las Vegas, begging for money and doing whatever tricks he wanted them to do to get the money. And I was just thinking, what great reality TV it would be, Mike, if I had a couple $1 billion like Soros or Adelson, and I could say, well, you can come here, and I'm going to televise it, and here's a $50 million prize, but you have to fight each other like those kids did.
They'd probably do it. They'd probably do it. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'd pay big money to watch that, Mike.
Oh, I would too. I would too. I think it's time to bring back gladiatorial games, for politicians.
Reverse the bread and circuses thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Mike, Mike, I'm sorry. I've got a call. I got to take this. I got to roll. Thank you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back to the guns and the dark side of it, we're getting back to this story here about the Waffle House shooter, Travis Reinking. And apparently he had lost his gun permit. His guns had been taken away and given to his father to lock up. But the father gave him back to Travis, and so now the father is being investigated for having done that. And yeah, that was definitely a bad call, because this Travis was a disaster waiting to happen. This guy was previously arrested by the Secret Service for trespassing on the White House grounds. And he tried to get into the White House. He demanded to see the president. And they knew all about this guy, and they still weren't able to stop him. If only somebody in that Waffle House had had a firearm. Thank goodness for that one guy who did wrestle him down. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. Back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open at 800-313-9443. And we're going to take a phone call from Stephen in North Carolina. Aloha, Stephen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Rivero. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
How is your wife doing?
She's doing better.
That's good. That's good. I have a state of affairs question. I guess what would Madison and Adams and Andy Jackson do if our country was like this?
Well, it's really hard to say, because the context of the time, of the times they lived in. It's like a lot of people criticize the Founding Fathers for owning slaves, except back then that was the accepted normal behavior. So it's hard to second guess them. I imagine they would be very upset, obviously.
And they probably have tap of balls in hand. Take care of business,
Well, again, I don't like the idea of a new revolution. I don't think the American people are ready for it. And the wrong people get hurt in those kind of things. I prefer the Gandhi approach.
Yeah, I am too. I like knowledge, but it only gets us so far. And here's what I think about the well, we got $750 billion going through DOD. I think they're buying lots of filet mignon.
I'm sorry, we've got how much going to who? Your phone connection is really bad. I'm not able to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right, the DOD just got what $750 billion?
Close to it. Yep.
And I think a lot of that's going to what, filet mignon?
It might. One of the locations that we used when we were shooting the TV series Lost was the house for one of the major commanders at Pearl Harbor. I'm not going to say who it was. Talk about a plush house. I mean, it was like maybe 2 inches short of being an outright mansion. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I imagine it is. They milk us, and take us for fools, And it's very upsetting,
Yep.
But that's all I wanted to call in. I just wanted to call in and bitch about that.
Okay, well, thank you for the phone call, and we're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here, a lot of people, when we talk about crime and gun crime, they've been pushing this system of microphones. We even have them here in Hawaii, where if somebody fires a gun, that it will immediately triangulate where the shot came from so that police can swoop on down and catch the malefactor. I think maybe one of the reasons they banned firecrackers here in Hawaii for Independence Day and New Year's was concerned that people would use that to mask a real gunshot. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. But apparently over in Fall River, Massachusetts, they've got their system. It's $120,000 a year. It's called Shot Spotter. And apparently it missed all 7 shots that were fired when a man was killed 2 months ago in the downtown area. So these systems, again, good idea, very expensive, doesn't really work all that well. Now, over in California, they have a law they passed in 2015, the California Healthy Youth Act, which sounds really good, but only now are some of its more controversial provisions starting to take effect in the classrooms. Under the claims that this is all about health, the law says it will equip students to develop healthy attitudes on gender and sexual orientation. It will inform students about the effectiveness and safety of all FDA-approved contraceptive methods and facilitate objective discussion about parenting, adoption, and abortion. And basically, Red State contributor Kira Davis, who lives in Orange County, California, says that among the teaching materials approved for use under the law are a study guide for the transgender children's book, I Am Jazz, as well as a sexual health toolkit. Now, I think that these issues are something that should be left to the parents. And my question is, just what jobs is the education system preparing these kids for? We need to get back to the basics. Teach them skills. Teach them math, engineering, science, or if they prefer art, whatever, something that they can make money with. Anyway, a lot of people still talking about, well, first of all, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates rejoining our network. A lot of people are talking about this Smallville actress, Allison Mack, who was part of this apparent sex cult led by this guy, Keith Rainier. It's come on out that he had sex with girls as young as 12, which I find disgusting. But it looked like he was trying to set up his own little sort of sexual orientation Scientology church or something, because apparently this group actually held wild parties on Richard Branson's private Caribbean island to try and recruit him into their organization or support their organization. As it turned out, Branson wasn't there the 2 times that they held their party, so that really didn't work on out. Here's another example of political correctness and the nanny state going just way, way too far. This is over at Penn State University, and they have this outdoor recreation club. You know, when you were in school, there were clubs. When I was in high school, I was in the photography club, in the astronomy club, briefly in the equestrian club. And they're, you know, clubs are part of the education experience. So Penn State has this outdoor recreation club. It's almost 100 years old. The Penn State University has now banned this outdoor recreation club from going outside, saying it's simply too dangerous out in the wilderness. Well, I'm sorry, but obviously somebody interested in outdoor recreation wants to learn about how to survive and be comfortable in the wilderness. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is utterly ridiculous. It's amazing here. All right, let's talk about computers and computing things. Let's see. Okay. Somebody corrected me. Apparently, I said Kennesaw, Washington. I thought I said Kennesaw, Georgia, but yeah, it's Kennesaw, Georgia. Okay, there's a former Facebook executive, and he's out there. His name is Sean Parker. He was the first president of Facebook, and he's out there saying that he regrets helping create social media in the form that we know it today, saying that he didn't really understand the consequences of what they were doing, because having that network that grows to 1 billion or 2 billion people literally changes your relationship with society and with each other. And other observers have commented that in the age of the tablet and the smartphone, direct personal interactions are in decline. People are losing their social skills. So the Sean Parker is saying, you don't realize it, but you're being programmed, and heaven only knows what it's doing to children's brain. Now, Facebook, as you know, is out there shutting down conservative websites. They're blocking conservative posts. They're being a little reckless in other areas because, according to Motherboard, it turns out Facebook has been hosting posts by cyber criminals that have stolen identity information. And apparently some of these lists of social security numbers and identities have been on Facebook since 2014. Facebook's shares took a hit on that one. And apparently Facebook, they're hawking stolen identities. Apparently other things are going on. Facebook isn't paying attention. They're too busy chasing the conservatives here. And here's where it gets really kind of weird, because there was a Facebook post that literally said, kill Trump, hang him, hunt him. Facebook left it up saying the page does not violate their community standards. The bias is obvious there, and people should just disconnect from Facebook. Find new social media that respects your right to freedom of speech. Over at YouTube, they deleted about 5 million videos from their platform for content policy violations in last year's fourth quarter. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. There is a lawsuit that has been filed. It's a class action lawsuit. It's filed by a former Google employee, James Damore. We talked about him before. And in it, he claims a senior engineer at Google pressured officials to sabotage President Donald Trump's Android phone. And according to evidence provided in the suit, implores the tech giant to use the full economic force of Google for good. And one of the things Google did is they deleted Gmail accounts of some of Trump's associates for abuse. I mean, they were all on board for Hillary, and they still couldn't get her in. Another article, this one coming out of Patriot Rising. Research shows Google's search manipulations during 2016 favored Hillary Clinton. They tried to rig the election for Hillary Clinton. Anything about Hillary was all good news at the top, all the bad news was buried at the bottom. Search for Bernie Sanders, the bad stuff would come up first. And Google employees, including at least 6 high-ranking executives, donated more than $1.3 million to Clinton's 2016 campaign. Call it censorship or manipulation, but the truth is Google attempted to rig the election for Hillary Clinton by manipulating searches and suggestions and therefore voters' minds. It didn't work, but they got caught doing it. Now, getting on back to James Comey's new book, he talks a little bit about encryption. And he's out there chastising social media and high-tech companies for being opposed to back doors. And he comes on out with this overly simplistic explanation that the managers of social media and the manufacturers of smartphones and tablets, they see everybody as basically being good. And he goes on to say that the tech companies don't see the darkness that the FBI sees. Our days are dominated by the hunt for people planning terrorist attacks, hurting children, engaging in organized crime. So he's out there trying to justify the government's attitude of all of their communications should be private and encrypted, but all of yours should be wide open. Now, again, as we proved with the NSA challenge, real criminals, real terrorists, real malefactors can very easily write systems of encryption that are unbreakable by the NSA. Over the course of a year, we issued 6 different challenges. Not one of them was ever solved. And I'm not an expert on encryption, and I'm only a moderately decent programmer. If I can do it, other people can do it. Ooh, we got sirens going down the street outside. Okay, TSB Bank had a bit of a whoopsie. Their online banking was basically wrecked by a systems upgrade. It caused a meltdown. Apparently, one man wound up with an extra 13,000 pounds in his account. And apparently, customers were able to access other customers' accounts. That's a major, major goof. Let's see what else happened here. So apparently, this is still ongoing. Whatever happened to like testing this on, a limited system and make sure it's working before you just throw it onto the main system? This is a very chilling article. This is from defenseone.com, and it's talking about this sudden rush to put AI into military weapons. And this has a lot of people very concerned because the AIs are getting so complex. Their human programmers don't really know what's going on inside, and it could lead to mistakes. And this article is saying that basically experts are saying that artificial intelligence could actually increase the risk of a nuclear war. Things could spin out of control way too fast for humans to intervene. And apparently this was a study by the Rand Corporation, which is the big think tank everybody goes to when they have a question. So now we're going to get our mushroom clouds by robots. Here's another article, and we've been seeing a lot of this stuff here. This, again, is in the Daily Mail. Will the iPhone X be Apple's downfall? Mobile manufacturers' slowing sales are a bad omen for the firm as high-end handsets fail to attract customers. Well, yeah, it's $1,000. It's $1,000 coupled with the fact that that face mapping thing isn't reliable. In fact, it's easy to hack. And Apple is already basically slashing orders for new units from the factories in China. And it looks like demand for this handset has basically started to fall just one financial quarter after its release. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is that Apple is realizing that people don't buy expensive handsets as a status symbol. Oh, look, I have the iPhone 10. I'm important. I'm somebody. And there is now word that Apple is going to come out with a follow-on phone that will have all the features of the iPhone 10, but be only half the price, which is probably still a little too expensive. Because if you really think about how much material goes into these phones and how they're assembled, mostly by robotics, the cost to manufacture per unit can't be that high. But they've got the iPhone and they've got the inside track. And I think if you look at other comparable phones and how low they sell for, it's obvious that Apple has been gouging its users all along, and people don't respond well to that. Over in China, they're starting to enact some very stringent laws over social media news sharing. They apparently are trying to limit self-fed news, which is another word for blogging, people sharing information peer-to-peer. They're trying to force people back into dependency on the official government version of what's going on, backed up by their corporate media. And a lot of people are concerned this might have to do with mounting global crop losses and food price increases. Now, we know that a lot of corporations are very threatened by the fact that people are talking to each other. We're talking about vaccine dangers. We got more about that a little bit later in the show. GMOs. And I think we have to realize that prior to the invention of the internet and the independent media, corporations were probably selling dangerous products all the way back then. Remember lead-based paint? Only now consumers can find out about this stuff and warn each other away. And the corporations don't like that. And they're trying to figure out some way they can shut down the independent media without it becoming a First Amendment case. So it's getting a little bit tense out there. Well, we are an empire in decline. There's no two ways about that. Let's talk about human-caused global warming. Out in Billings, Montana, they broke the record for the most snowfall in a winter season since records started being kept. Snow and snow everywhere. Another forecast for snow in Great Britain as temperatures start to drop again. And we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about human-caused global warming, and we're talking about all these stories. It's still snowing in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're coming up on May. As I've mentioned before, all of these articles that come on out saying, "Oh, we got a lot of snow today," but you know, it's not that big a deal. It's not that unusual. You know, back in 1860, we had snow this late in the year. They're missing the point. The point is that back in 2000, the carbon Nazis were out there saying snowfalls were a thing of the past. Al Gore predicted the Arctic would be totally ice-free by, I think it was, 2014, something like that. Didn't happen. If the global warming people were right, there shouldn't be any snow at all, because that's what they were claiming back in 2000. We've had a very hard winter. And the carbon Nazis are still out there pushing their snake oil. They want those carbon taxes. They want you to agree to let the government tell you how to live your life to save planet Earth from all you icky-poo human beings. And they're ignoring the real world. That's not a good way to be governing. Apparently up in Wisconsin, their agricultural industry is in a little bit of trouble because apparently farmers have suffered a lot of damage from the late snow, a lot of crop damage, and the agriculture secretary is looking at options for recovery. So what it basically means is a later planting season, no bumper crops when we get into autumn, which means we may be looking at some small food shortages and an increase in food prices in the supermarket. Now, over in Great Britain, they're importing huge amounts of American timber to fight climate change. They want to burn up the trees rather than have to burn that bad coal. Ooh, we can't burn coal. That puts carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Actually, so does burning a tree. And right now, with these hard winters, perhaps a little more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is not a bad idea. Not that it would actually increase global warming, because even NASA now admits that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere does not behave like a pane of glass in a greenhouse. It actually acts as an atmospheric coolant. But more CO2 in the air would make plants grow bigger and faster and produce more crop. Commercial greenhouses deliberately increase the CO2 inside their greenhouses for that very reason. Apparently over in Germany, their solar industry is, well, they're having problems. And basically what it is, in 2007, solar operations in Germany were guaranteed feed-in tariffs of 49.2 euro cents per kilowatt hour. And this was very attractive. So a lot of people got into the solar industry, but now the German government is basically cutting the subsidies. And without those subsidies, solar doesn't pencil out. This is another, quick for publicity's sake, green stunt that really didn't work out very well. And we've seen the Solyndra case. Now we're seeing the German solar industry. These are things that are basically propped up by tax incentives or subsidies. And when the subsidies are gone, they can't make it. And maybe we should be doing these projects without subsidies so that somebody will do the engineering to say, yes, this can exist and operate without the subsidies. Because when you set up a corporation in the expectation that you're going to get government subsidies, you're going to basically create just what you need to create to meet those needs. And if the subsidies go, you go under. The real solution is come up with a solar or wind farm that is going to be able to economically make sense standing on its own. By the way, apparently over in Great Britain, they're getting ready to build what will be the world's largest windmill for power generation. And it's something like 800-foot blade. I mean, it's just a monstrous thing. And of course, the problem with the windmills is they tend to chop up birds because they put the windmills where the wind is, and the birds tend to ride the wind to save energy. The other problem with Germany's solar industry is the bad weather that they've been getting. Overcast all the time. Apparently, they had just 10 hours of sunshine in December of last year. So there's an issue there. Now, maybe Elon Musk is onto something, thinking that an upscaled version of the Tesla's lithium battery could allow for an efficient, cost-effective storage so that electricity generated when the sun is out is available for use when the sun is obscured. But at this point, the technology does not seem mature enough to really stand on its own. It can be propped up. Anything can be propped up with enough taxpayer money. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Go ahead and start calling into the show, 800-313-9443. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, over the last few years, we have reported on from time to time about how holistic doctors, natural healers, people who go against the grain of the orthodox medical industrial complex seem to die in very strange circumstances, or they simply disappear and they're never seen from again. And there's now been another one. This actually took place down in Peru, where there was this very famous traditional healer, Olivia Arevalo Lomas, and she was assassinated with 5 gunshots to the heart. The assailants basically broke into her home and shot her dead in front of her family and in the presence of children. Apparently, the FDA is declaring homeopathic remedies illegal. They've announced plans to make homeopathic remedies illegal as part of the crackdown on alternative medicine. You will get your pills from the pharmacy. You will give your money to the pharmaceutical corporations. You will not grow medicines in your backyard. How dare you do that? How dare you be independent? So basically what the FDA wants to do is have homeopathic drugs go through the FDA's approval process, which can be hideously expensive. And it's obviously something pharmaceutical corporations can afford to do, but small operations cannot. So we'll wait to see what happens, what kind of an impact, but we may have to start looking at stockpiling. Because I trust the homeopathic medications a heck of a lot more than what comes out of those pharmacy labs. Now, apparently Merck has been accused of fraud, deceit, and negligence in a Gardasil case here in the United States. And Merck is out there running commercials. They want to push HPV vaccine. Even though Gardasil is turning out to be one of the most dangerous vaccines out there, causing more injuries than any other vaccination in history. According to the World Health Organization's Vidya Access database, as of April 9th of this year, a total of 85,329 reports of adverse reactions have been filed regarding the HPV vaccination. These reports include 37,699 reports of nervous system disorders, 2,450 cardiac disorders, including 38 cardiac arrests, 533 reports of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, over 3,200 reports of seizures, 8,453 syncope, and 389 deaths. And they're prescribing this to little girls who are way too young to be sexually active. And by the time they're old enough to be sexually active, they need another shot. They're trying to prescribe it to boys now who are not likely to get cervical cancer. It's just about the money. They're pushing. And Gardasil is FDA approved. Keep that in mind. Now, as you know, the vaccine industry, having pretty much got everybody jabbing their arms, is moving on to a fresh market, pets. And so now there's a whole slew of pet vaccines, vaccines for your dogs. And they're pushing that. Oh, your dog has to have this vaccine. It's got to have that vaccine. Money, 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 money. And so the anti-vaccine people are now concerned about that. And so apparently the British Veterinary Association decided to respond to the concerns about dogs' vaccines by saying, well, dogs cannot get autism. Well, how do you know? They haven't been vaccinated till now. Before the vaccine showed up, autism was rare. It was very rare. And saying dogs cannot get autism implies you know what causes autism. So there's something weird going on there. This next one, talk about getting out there and getting ridiculous. PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, filed a lawsuit against a photographer over a series of monkey selfies shot in 2011 using the photographer's camera. The monkey took the camera, took some pictures of himself, and PETA filed the lawsuit on behalf of the monkey seeking financial control over the photos, claiming the photographer engaged in copyright infringement because the copyright belongs to the monkey. And the court ruled sensibly in this case, only humans can claim copyright. And the court ruled that the photographer being sued was entitled to attorney's fees in the case. But I mean, that's just how ridiculous our society has become. PETA sues a photographer, wants financial control over the photos to make money off of, and then they'll send the monkey a banana as the monkey's piece of the action. Let's go to the phones here. Mike in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I was also reading an article about the Bitcoin. There was a book that this person read, and and he was saying, if you don't want me to spoil it, just stop here and read the book, and then otherwise, if you're just interested, just finish the article, whatever. But the whole thing about Bitcoin, that there's the miners, and people were saying that it doesn't have any value, but I think the value comes from the fact that you can mine the Bitcoin, and then it gives it more security, credibility. But when you want to compare the crypto, like Bitcoin, there's other cryptos, but when you want to compare them to the dollar, it's almost like with the dollar, you're paying rent, and your rent goes up through inflation, and you're getting less and less and less, and then there's all kinds of abuse, and now we're talking, like you were earlier in your show today, trillion here, trillion everywhere. I mean, come on. So what the Bitcoin would do, I believe its value comes from decentralization, number one, because the central banks cannot get their hands on it to print it. They're trying to regulate it now. They're trying to tax it. But I'll tell you, at this point, it's been around 8-9 years. As far as I understand, China could not. They can't shut it down. Technology is going so quick right now. Like perhaps they could shut down an exchange. Okay. Now they have robots that will just switch you over to another exchange. So they could shut that one exchange down, another one will pop up. Now I'm just talking about trading here. Trading the crypto Bitcoin. And by the way, it did take the cut of 20,000. It went down to like 7. It's back up to almost 10 now. So it's here to stay. But getting back to the story, the dollar is almost like you pay rent, and your rent keeps going up. Well, pretty soon you're not able to pay rent anymore. You got other expenses. You're going broke. And you're at the mercy of the government. But the Bitcoin, what it does is it allows for entrepreneurship. It allows the little guy or just the person can sell herself to be entrepreneurial, to take that money and invest it in something that works, and not something like building bridges to nowhere and waste. I just heard on your show, I thought there's $20 trillion missing.
$20 trillion is missing, and that's over and above the $20 trillion national debt. Now, let me respond to some of what you said up to this point. First of all, I want to separate the idea of decentralization from the idea of the Bitcoin value. The decentralization is its primary attraction for a lot of people. They don't want to have to be dependent on the Federal Reserve. They don't want to be paying, interest on the money loaned by the Federal Reserve. That decentralization allows for much more privacy. That's one of the reasons governments hate it so much. The Federal Reserve hates it because, again, they're not able to charge interest on it, and they're trying to come up with their cryptocurrency to sort of ride the trend and ride the fashion. But it's just going to be another fiat currency that is loaned into circulation at interest to keep the bankers very, very wealthy. Now, the sad reality is there is nothing backing up the value of cryptocurrencies. The U.S. dollar is backed up with the future slave labor of America. How much that's worth, we really don't know. But cryptocurrencies are completely ephemeral. And what they're worth is what people are willing to pay for it. And that can change with the tide. And we've seen some very dramatic swings. The other issue is that cryptocurrencies are very much dependent on the computer infrastructure to keep on working. We know that a lot of these cryptocurrency exchanges have been hacked. And you're absolutely right. There are a lot of places that are trying to get it under control. Here in Hawaii, you're not allowed to have a Bitcoin wallet. They passed a law against it, keep us all slaves to the banks. But my concern with the cryptocurrencies is that the people who have either bought or stolen large numbers of these specialized Bitcoin mining computers are going to be able to manipulate Bitcoin to their own advantage. That they could run up its value and then basically sell out. They could do a pump and dump with it in theory.
Yeah, right. Can I just make one more point? I got to get going myself. But
okay.
What got me excited was I got a buddy in Greece, and he owed me like $160. It was so easy, through PayPal. I got the email. I logged into PayPal. They said, do you want it to go right into your bank account? It'll take a couple days, or do you want it right now on your credit card with a little fee, like 25 cents? And then I just said, I'll wait a couple days, just put it in my account, and we were done. And he's in Greece.
Yes.
My friend is in Greece. I mean, it's so beautiful. We could have some kind of an electronic system that leaves the middleman out. You know what I mean? Look, I know there's problems. I know there's hacking, and I know there's concerns, but I think the future is going to be bright. I think we're going to open up this new paradigm, since the 1800s, and then we had the Industrial Revolution, and now we have the network revolution. And I think, I hope to see it one day. I don't know. You and I are getting kind of old. We probably won't. When we were kicking cans around when we were kids, we didn't even have cell phones, you know what I mean? And now all this stuff is just here, but I just wanted to get you excited a little bit about it. But I know, there's all the concerns that you mentioned.
Yeah.
But you know what? Maybe it'll be overcome. As excited as I got about getting $160 for my friend in Greece. All right? I mean, that is so simple, and it was just...
Well, yeah, it really is. And the fact that you can do that is one of the arguments against needing a single global currency for trade and banking. In this age of instantaneous global financial transaction and confirmation, there really is no need for a single global currency anymore. But the U.S. is still trying to pull everybody back into that. Anyway, Mike, we're going to let you go. We're going to switch over to Randy in South Dakota. Aloha, Randy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I got the humor for today.
Good.
PETA stands for?
People eating tasty animals.
Hey, good job. There's so much bad news. You got to have some humor in this deal.
Yeah, I know. I try and find some ways to lift the spirit of the show up, but it is very difficult with all that's going on here. And, we've got all these warplanes training overhead, rattling the windows, and it's just a constant reminder of how close we are to something really bad happening.
Yeah, we got to figure something out. Get our troops back home.
I agree. Let's get them back home, put them to work fixing the roads and bridges.
Yep. So everybody call anybody you know in the military and talk to them.
Well, good luck getting to them. Yeah, I understand that the military, they're trying to limit communications again. I know that my website is banned on military bases, so what can I tell you? Anyway, Randy, we're going to let you go. And
okay.
Thank you. We're going to get on back to the news here. Now, the U.S. has a major problem with nuclear waste. And it has for a lot of time. When they started up the nuclear industry, when they started the Manhattan Project, nobody was really thinking, what are we going to do with all this radioactive debris? And every time there's an attempt to come up with a solution, whichever state the planned permanent repository for nuclear waste is going to be says, no, not in my state, the stuff is too dangerous. And we have Hanford is a disaster. Their workers are getting sick again. But part of the nuclear waste has to do with plutonium. Now, back when all of this was starting on up, the U.S. favored uranium fission reactors because one of the byproducts of the fission reactor was plutonium, which is useful in nuclear weapons. And so basically, as plutonium became available, the U.S. would make another bomb out of it. But because of the a treaty with Russia, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, they had to limit how many warheads to under 1,550. And so now the plutonium is just starting to stack up. There are some 54 metric tons of surplus plutonium stored in nuclear facilities the U.S. Department of Energy operates around the country. And apparently in Pantex, the surplus plutonium has exceeded the 20,000 cores, also known as pits, that regulations allow such facilities to store in the temporary storage facility. And the reason that is of a concern, of course, is the possibility of spontaneous fission taking place, leading to excessive heating, leading to the boil off of the water and boron coolant, and igniting the stuff into fire. And again, very short-sighted thinking. We need the bomb. We have to have the bomb to give Japan what for, just to prove that we can do it. And I guess that's a failing of the American culture, certainly of our government. The ability to actually think forward 20, 30 years. What am I doing today that is going to have, what's it going to do to the world, to the people, 30 years from today? Nobody seems to ask that anymore. Everything is just so short. Planned obsolescence, 30 and 60-second sound bites. We're going to take another break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about America's problem with radioactive waste, and because of a Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty from 2010, capping the number of nuclear warheads that Russia and the U.S. can have, the plutonium, instead of being turned into bombs, is just piling up. Now, obviously, I think it's a good thing that they're not making more bombs. There are already enough to kill the entire world and make the rubble bounce 3 times. But it is a problem. The plutonium is stacking up. And one would think that maybe now's the time to start looking at thorium cycle reactors, which other countries have. Again, the reason the U.S. went down the uranium fission route is you got bomb stuff as a side effect. Thorium cycle reactors are a lot cleaner. There's a lot less problem with radioactive waste. Thorium is a very abundant element in the Earth's crust. Very easy to find. Used to be used in things like high refractive index glass. In fact, I have a camera lens that used thorium glass, which I in turn used to test my radiation meters. But thorium cycle reactors have been started in other countries, and they are working. And maybe it's time, as these fission reactors reach the end of their lifespans, maybe it's time to start thinking a different way of generating that kind of power. Or maybe, instead of spending all this money on weapons of war in other countries, we should have made the push through to fusion power, because that would be even cleaner and plenty of energy to drive our factories and our homes. But I guess our government thinks war is fun. It's cool. They're out there, war, it's fantastic. I like to watch the bodies fly. Well, it's not your money, it's not your kid. Apparently, the non-governmental organization Reporters Without Borders, which is a left-leaning organization, I should point out, is now out there trying to sell the idea that criticizing corporate media journalists is now hate speech. Remember what I said before when we were talking about South Carolina looking at that law to criminalize criticism of Israel's government? And I said, if they get this, they'll find other things to carve out little chunks out of that First Amendment. And here it is, right there. Reporters Without Borders criticizing corporate media journalists is now hate speech. So we have to criminalize it. Those corporate talking heads, I mean, they work very, very hard, and we shouldn't let bad things be said about them. So there's not much left of the country I thought I was born into. And maybe it's been this way all along and I just didn't see it. I mean, my eyes didn't really open until 1994 in the Vince Foster affair. Actually, that's not accurate. That's not accurate. My eyes were open when I got that old issue of Post magazine and saw Lee Oswald standing at ground level in front of the book depository as JFK was shot in the throat. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. And stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I understand that Stephen Elkins is going to be sharing the mic with him for a little part of the show. They've got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, Share it with everybody that you know. Forget social media. We're being filtered and blocked like crazy. It's a total waste of time to go there. So keep RBN alive. Tell 5. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.